Greetings, friends! Juan Ingruski here, and this is the weekly Russian-Ukraine War update for the week of February 17th through February 23rd of 2025. And if you want to continue receiving these weekly Russian-Ukraine War updates, be sure to subscribe to this channel, give this video a thumbs up, comment your thoughts, and share this video around. And this week, beginning tomorrow, actually, it'll be the end of the third year of this war and the beginning of the fourth year of this war. So let's kind of go over what happened this last week of this, before the anniversary of this war. We're actually going to begin in a opposite clockwise motion that we usually start in the South Donetsk area. We're actually going to start in the Kursk direction. And I'm going to be speaking in Kursk because there's been changes here, but there's one thing that's very interesting that has come to my attention that I think I want to talk about here. Let's talk about what actually happened in Kursk this week first, though. First, let's talk about this in the more western direction. So we talked about how last week the Russians entered the village of Serododkovko but mostly cleared it. Well, this week we got basically 100% confirmation that they completely captured this village here. So before we were talking about how the Russians mostly cleared this, now we have 100% confirmation that the Russians have cleared it, and have cleared everything up to the Russian border. And I've actually cleared all these fields between Darino, Nikhail Darino, and this village here. Not only that, we actually have map updates saying that the Russians have already begun clashes for the village of Lebedivka, and that the Russian, I think it's the paratroopers, the 106 paratrooper regiment, I think, is battling here. So they have entered the western outskirts of Lebedivka here. So now the battle for this village is ongoing. This is all part of the major Russian push that's been going on here for the last few months during this winter campaign to try to reach this kind of long, stringy line of villages that the Ukrainians held with the center being in Bilohorivka here. So that is the main, but it seems like the Russians have kind of stopped in this northern area. And I actually I'm going to now talk about why I think they've stopped trying to encircle Ukrainian positions, trying to clear everything here, because I think there's a new tactic going on. But before we do that, let me talk about the southern part here. Now, remember that counteroffensive the Ukrainians did about 2 weeks ago? Well, that has been completely reduced to ashes. We talked about how the Russians cleared the village of Fantasia last week. Well, this week we have cleared the village of Cherkasy-Oblast and cleared this area here from Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians fell back to the Suchka suburbs. So there's a lot to we don't know, and now so the Ukrainians were trying to delay the Russians. Maybe that worked, but if they wanted to maybe expand their foothold here, it just got reversed. And Cherkasy-Oblast and the villages that the Ukrainians took during that counteroffensive was completely reversed. So those were and then also I think the Russians have crossed the Pestel River and are battling for the village of Krylovka. And so a lot of sources are saying the Russians have taken this village. These pro-Russian sources, but it's not been 100% confirmed yet. But taking all this into account, some small gains. People might be like, okay, these are small gains, but what exactly is happening? Why am I talking about Kursk first? Well, because there's something new here, and this week the Russians have entered Sumy Oblast. And the reason why I say that is because, according to some pro-Russian sources, is that once they've secured this area to the north here, they're still pushing east to the east. But a lot of sources are saying the Russians have actually crossed the international border and entered Sumy Oblast and are battling for. Some sources are saying they took the village of Nonevka and are trying to enter the village of Basivska here. And so you might be wondering, why are they doing this? Well, look here. If you look at the big picture in this, what I call the Suchka tumor, because it looks like a tumor, there's only one highway that supplies the entire Ukrainian garrison in this entire Kursk area. So they have their positions. This is where their main communication command centers are in Sumy, and then they use this highway to supply their local base in Suchka, and then from Suchka they then disperse units to maybe in Bilohorivka, to the more to the east here near Cherkasy-Oblast, and then obviously in Suchka itself. But this is where it gets interesting, is that now that the Russians have cleared these areas to the north, a lot of sources are saying that instead of trying to slowly squeeze towards Suchka, a lot of sources are saying that the Russians are going to be crossing this international border at least on this front and try to cut this highway. So a lot of sources are saying they're going from Cherkivka down here. So if they take these two villages, look how close they are to the highway here. All it takes is just one little dash and they could take it. And if I were the Russians, some sources are also saying they've also entered the village of Zurovka here. Looks like giraffe or some shit. But anyway, this would also make sense because it's not enough just to like cut off on one area, because the Ukrainians could have a lot of position. They're going to need to make a small little foothold here, a small little incursion. And so my guess is that the Russians are going to push down here towards Bezivsky and from Zurovka and try to reach the village of Yunanovka here. And then you'll have something like this. The Russians are going to try to take this small little area, and not only will this cut the main highway that supports Suchka, this will create a huge encirclement risk. Now there is, obviously there's like these fields here that the Russians could use. There's no big road or highway, but obviously, that doesn't mean the infantry can't leave, for example. But it would severely hamper the logistics of the Kursk salient here, the Suchka tumor. But this is where the southern part of the area comes in. So in this area, as we can see, the battles for Kurilovka and Guvovko actually show what the Russians are planning here. So if the Russians do what I explained earlier and manage to break into Sumy Oblast, which is, according even to President Putin, that this has already started, we shall see if they actually develop it, then the Russian push to cross the Pesel River and maybe try to take Kurilovka, Gulovo, and try to maybe take everything here. And my guess is also the Russians, some sources are saying they're also going to try to get rid of this little incursion here and try to take the village of Miropilia, because there's a river that goes like this. And so the Russians could take something like this. And then from here, as you can see, then there's basically, they made an encirclement. They made a giant encirclement of the Ukrainians in Suchka. So it's a very big, it's going to be very hard for the Ukrainians to hold their position in the Kursk. So, according to a lot of sources, the Russians have entered Sumy Oblast. Some sources are also saying they're already battling for Nonovka and Zurovka, but we shall see if that actually develops, or maybe that was just, reconnaissance and force, or maybe they, because one thing Putin does not like is he does not like to do things that aren't legal. He doesn't consider Sumy part of Russia, so he doesn't want to enter it. So he might, instead go the hard way of trying to encircle Suchka, while the Ukrainians keep getting supplied through this highway here. So, yeah, we shall see if how this develops. But I wouldn't be surprised if they don't do the easy path of trying to enter Sumy Oblast and cut the highway. But it would be something that a lot of pro-Russian commentators are talking about that is happening. So we shall follow what's happening in Kursk with interest. Alrighty, there's been no changes in the Kharkov direction. Now let us go to the Kupiansk direction, which is where a lot of interesting things are happening. We always like what's happening with the Dorichnia bridgehead. But this week we actually have another bridgehead happening, and this is very interesting, is that this week the Russians have completely captured the village of Tolopilia here. We have geolocated footage that the Russians have that were getting shelled in this little village. Now, this is in the lowland, so in order to actually expand their positions here, they have to take some of these things in the hills here. So if they want to secure Tolopilia, they probably have to take Strelov-Kivka and take these, kind of more of the high ground here. This is interesting because my guess is that they're going to, obviously they have the Osko River, which requires pontoon crossings, but if they could expand their positions in the north here, my guess is that what they might be trying to do is connect with their positions in the Dorichnia bridgehead, because then they'll have a road that goes from, Russia, Russian-controlled territory, and then they'll have a road that could, directly supply Dorichnia through overland, so they don't have to keep doing like pontoon bridge crossings. So that might be what the purpose here is. But this is, in order to do that, the Russians are going to have to expand from Furilovka. They might have to take the village of Petro, Ilinivka, Metrofanovka, Novovasilyivka, and and then try to encircle this big, well, not big, but pretty decent sized village of Kamyanka, which will be the next goal here. The Russians are going to have to expand from Tolopilia, take some of the hills to the north of it. The Russians will have to expand their positions here, and then try to encircle Kamyanka. But if they could do that, if they could take Kamyanka, then they'll have a huge bridge. Fuck it, I need a. There we go. They'll have to expand their bridge as something like this. And then they'll have a huge, they'll have a road network that supplies their positions, an overland network. So, if the Ukrainians keep bombing their pontoon bridges, they have an overland route that can't be molested. Though this expands the foothold a lot, they could just put the troops that are guarding this area and then just move them here. So it does not necessarily expand the front, but it does help give them an overland route. So that is something interesting in the northern sector. But in terms of this Dorichnia bridgehead itself, the Russians are mostly focused in the south here. This week, the Russians have, a lot of sources are saying the Russians have pushed south from the village of Kelinovo and actually reached the village of Glublovka. Now, we don't have any geolocated footage of that. We just have map updates and some reports on the ground. But this does show that the Russian, and this does make sense because the Russians, have basically positions, and they took the village of Sinkovka after 2 years, and they also cleared this force. So they have positions here, so they could reach Glboka before they reach Kupiansk, and where the Ukrainians still have position on the other side of the Oskol. So it does make logical sense that the Russians could reach Globovka. We just don't have any confirmation of that yet. My guess is that they're trying to do that to try to maybe outflank the village of Kinder Daraskivska, and because I think the two main things that they want to actually start battling for Kupiansk, because there's two main goals of this Dorishi bloodshed. One goal is to just outflank Kupiansk from the north. The other is that this is a prelude to a Russian operation to take everything to the south of this line, because then they could use this river as a natural defense line, and then they could take everything to the north here. This will take a huge chunk of Kharkov Oblast, and finally end the battle for Vachansk. And so there's two minds about it. But in order, there's to battle to encircle Kupiansk from the north, and then also take this. So there's two ways to do it. So obviously we talked about how this north, the expansion of the bridgehead to the north obviously feeds into the fact that they're going to try to take this northeastern part of Kharkov. But also, if they're this expansion southwards and trying to reach the village of Mana Chinanivka, Kinder. Fuck, these are such weird names. Well, I mean, not weird names. I just can't pronounce things for shit. But anyway, their expansion southward shows that they also want to encircle Kupiansk, so it might be a double-edged mission here. But in any case, so we might expect to see, this map isn't updated, but there might be some of these fields between Kalinovo and Glubovka that have been captured by the Russians, or maybe they have captured this village instead. So this is something that's been reported. Also, the Russians have expanded southwards a little bit and have captured some more tree lines to the south of Zabatna. Reaching the village of Mala Shaptovkivka here. So my main guess is the Russians are going to keep expanding out of Dorishnia, but if they want to start invading Kupiansk, the two main villages they have to take is Mala Chernivka and Kinder Shchivka here. So this is where the Russians have to focus on. And then there's been nothing else in the other parts of the Kupiansk direction. I think the only other thing is that the village of Zaroshodovka is now contested, and Ukrainians control a lot of it. So, this village is now being contested. So this used to be under full Russian control, but now the Ukrainians counterattacked, and now there's battles going on between it. And I think the only other change is the Russians have taken some of these fields to the south of Lozova here. So just, improving their positions here a little bit. And some sources are saying they've almost cleared the village of Zlana High, finally, but we don't have any confirmation of that just yet. Alrighty, we're now actually going to go to the Liman direction, which is actually where some very interesting things have happened, and the speed of the offensives here has been picking up slowly, but it's more bigger than what we're used to in this direction here. So last week we talked about how we had geolocated footage of the Russians were in the southern part of Yampolovka. Well, this week we basically have confirmation from the Ministry of Defense that the village has been completely captured by the Russians, and not only that, they have captured these forest tree lines to the east of it. So they have taken Yampolovka for sure. They have cleared it, and that is one of the biggest goals for the Russians here. Well, it just, helps expand their positions. I talked about last week how this could help them encircle one of the main goals of their bridgehead in Ivanivka to try to take the village of Kolo Dodasky and try to maybe encircle it from the south. Because then they can march towards Myrnia, and they have as you can see, there's a road that goes over the Zhirobets River, so it gives them better supply positions here. But I don't know if they're going to keep marching down towards Tarskoye, but we shall see. But where the most interesting things are happening is actually more in the near the Makivka bridgehead here. So there's two bridgeheads. There's the Makivka bridgehead and then the Ivanivka Terny bridgehead here. And in the Makivka area, this is where a lot of the interesting things are happening. So one of the biggest things that happen is the complete capture of the village of Novolodembovka here. The Russian, it looks like, I don't know how exactly the battle went. I don't know if they crossed the river here. It seems a lot of, because the thing is, the Russians were already expanded their positions to the north of this area here. They actually managed to capture the village of Novolodembovka here. So that is actually a very big gain for the Russians here, capturing this. And so from here, what my guess is that what they're trying to do is link up the Ivanivka bridgehead with the Makivka bridgehead. So what we should probably expect is the Russians are going to probably clear they already have they already have a Makivka bridgehead on the other side here, but they also will try to clear out this area here to the other side of Balka-Zorovka, and then they have a continuous bridgehead from Makivka down to Ivanivka, and then for political purposes, I think the Russians are going to focus on the west of Luhansk Oblast, and we're going to talk about this when we go to the Seversk direction. But right now the Ukrainians control less than 1% of the Luhansk Oblast, but the Russians can't claim they control 100% of it. So it's going to be a big political victory. The Russians could push the Ukrainians out. So I think what the Russians might try to focus on is they're going to now try to focus on the village of Grigivka here and explode out of once they link up the Ivanivka and Makivka bridgeheads, try to take everything, here and such. Then they could try to start encircling Garivka and try to take everything, everything along the Luhansk Oblast here. So once they link up, I think the next focus will be on Grigivka here. But taking Novolunovka is a very big gain for the Russians, and we shall see if the Russians continue pushing in to try to take the rest of Luhansk Oblast. Alrighty, now we're going to go to the Seversk direction. And speaking of the Seversk direction, finally, the long-suffering village of Bilohorivka, which will probably no longer be a village after the end of this war because it was reduced to a moonscape, has fallen. This is another area which is part of the Luhansk Oblast, which was a thorn on Russian side. It does help that the Russian command of the Seversk direction has been particularly incompetent. They actually had to replace the commanders here because they lied through their teeth. But it seems like the new commander, despite being a bit slow, is now actually making some results after a few months, I should say. But this battle has been going on for about 2 years now. So what happened was that to actually take Bilohorivka, the Ukrainians had a very strong position. Apparently there was this bunker complex to the south of this quarry mine here, and apparently the Russians took it. And with the fall of this bunker complex, this entire quarry chalk mine fell. Not only that, the Russians took a bunch of these tree lines to the south here. And we actually have geolocated footage of the Russians have taken this tree line here, and this area here. And so with the capture of these tree lines to the south, this chalk mine, this gave the Russians the dominant position, and this forced the Ukrainians back towards the village of Grigorivka. And so this now we actually could say that the village of Bilohorivka has been completely captured by the Russians. We actually have geolocated footage of the Russians beyond the most western outskirts of this village. So this village has been captured, and let us hope that the Russians could hold on to these gains here, because I think the Ukrainians might want to counterattack here, because again they have to take Bilohorivka in order to actually say they completely captured Luhansk Oblast here. And then there's been nothing else in the Seversk direction. Now let us go to the Chasiv Yar direction, and this week most of the things are not actually happening in Chasiv Yar. Most of the things in Chasiv Yar have stayed the same. Which is kind of interesting. The Russians are making a lot of solid progress, then they stopped. I don't know why. Maybe there's a regrouping going on. But in any case, we're in the Chasiv Yar direction, where there's most actually events happening. It's not in Chasiv Yar, but in this northern area. We actually have geolocated footage of the Russians raising their flags in the village of Grigorivka here. So we actually have geolocated footage of the Russians have captured this entire village. We don't know the extent of it. I would think the Russians are going to try to reach the Seversky Donetsk Canal here, or maybe try to take all these tree lines here. But maybe that might be too much of a high order, but we shall see if the Russians... So we know that the village itself is under Russian control, but we don't know if maybe the Russians have reached this canal, which would make more strategic sense for them. And then also in Vasilivka, we talked about how the Russians claim they take this entire town. We just got geolocated footage. The Russians are in these tree lines to the west of the town, so at least they've entered this village, but we don't know if... We don't have any flag raising. We don't have geolocated confirmation of the Russians raising their flags in the northern part of Vasilivka, but we do have confirmation that the Russians are in these fields to the east of this village here. So at least they're in this village, but we don't know if they've completely captured it here. Alrighty, we are now going to go to the Tourette's direction, and in the Tourette's direction we actually have some interesting slow progress, but again, it seems like after the battle for Tourette's ended, the main focus for this group in the Minograd and Tourette's direction is to basically encircle this entire grouping. And so that is what the Russians are doing. When we talk about the Tourette's direction, a lot of pro-Russian sources that have said that the Russians have completely captured the village of Novospatsky. At the very least, we actually have geolocated confirmation that the Russians are in the center of this village, but some pro-Russian sources said they have captured this entire village, which, we don't have any confirmation of the Russians being on the more northern starts here, so we can't say 100% for certain, but according to some pro-Russian sources, this village has been taken. My guess is that if they have taken it, that the Russians will then try to clear these tree lines to the west of to the west of Novospatsky. They could use this kind of reservoir as a natural defense here, and then they could kind of like link up with some positions they've taken to the west of New York and all that, and kind of link up something like this here. So they could just take more of these fields and secure their positions in Novospatsky. And then from there, then the main thing will be focusing on trying to take the village of Shyrbrenka, which the Ukrainians are fighting over tooth and nail. But again, the main focus here is that if the Russians can take Novospatsky and Shyrbrenka, then this gives them one step closer to reaching the village of Kelebalka and Katerninivka, which will reach the reservoir here, and then from there they can then start moving westwards towards Alexandra Kelenovo, which is the main destination for the Russians in this area. Speaking of this Minigrad area, a lot of sources are also saying that the Russians have entered the southern part of Tarkovsky here, and that they have taken everything here. This map is not updated, but we don't have geolocated footage of them being in Tarkovsky. We just have map updates about that. But that being said, most sources are saying that the village of Tarkovsky now is being contested, and we shall see if the Russians could take all of it. Alrighty, now we're going to go to the Pokrovsk direction, and this week, this is where the Ukrainians are putting a lot of troops. They've put the Russian troops to the standstill. Into they were counterattacking. However, these counterattacks have been failing, and this week is actually pretty good for the Russians because not only last week we talked about how the Russians have recaptured the village of Pashana. This week the Russians have completely recaptured everything they lost in Kotelynivka here. Now we don't know if the Russians actually lost that, but this industrial zone is back under their control. I think this farm is still under their control. And the Russians have basically actually have some tree lines they retook here. So their position, Kotelynivka, are now more secure, but that doesn't mean they're expanding. They're just retaking, they're just holding off all these Ukrainian counterattacks here. So, the Russians have regained, they've stopped their advancements in this western Pokrovsk direction, but it does show that, the Ukrainians have slowed them down, but they have not taken them out. Another place where the Russians have actually have advanced is in the village of Listovka, which has actually been very contested very heavily, and I don't know why. But the Ukrainians are putting up a very big fight in Listovka. We actually have geolocated footage of the Russians being in the northern part of Listovka. Most sources are saying they've captured everything in the south of this river here, so they've captured the southern part of Listovka. So this village is not. I don't think this village has been completely taken yet, but we actually have geolocated footage even of the Russians even being in the northern part here. So I wouldn't be. This would be a very big gain for the Russians if they took Listovka, because then it helps them secure this flank near Selidova. Because then this connects Russian positions in Bilohorivka, which is is the main supply base for the Russians as they try to encircle Minigrad. These line of villages of Listovka, Doksitska, Zelenia help secure Russian positions in like Shenktayevko and such, which is the main, and Novotoretsk, which is the main logistics hub towards encircling Pokrovsk. So taking Listovka would be a very big gain for the Russians, but they have not taken it just yet. But they have entered it, and they have taken most of it. And then if we kind of go to the more south here, this is where the Russians are still a little bit on the offensive. And this week is mostly in the center bulge here. We have reports before we thought this was true, but we just got confirmation of this from the Russian Ministry of Defense. But the Russians do indeed have control over the village of Nadivka, which is a very big gain for the Russians here. This just secures their northern flank here a little bit. But along with it, but one of the biggest gains for the Russians are in the more southern part here. So the main battles are going on, for Serbria. They've taken Serbria. They have taken most of Zaporozhye. And so now what the Russians are trying to do is link up their positions in the north here near Nadivka towards the positions they're pushing in the south here towards the village of Berezhnovka here. They have actually taken these fields to the between these two villages here. So they're linking up these fortifications here. The main purpose here is they're going to try to take the village of Berezovska and take everything like this. And then I think they're going to, and also in the north here, we still don't know the exact positions of Uspenska, but my guess is that the Russians, what a lot of pro-Russians are say Uspenska fell, and that the battles are already going on for Nova Alexandrivka. But if that is the case, then I think they're going to try to take Nova Alexandrivka, take these fields between these areas, and then they're probably going to stop and regroup here, because then they'll have a flatter front line. This helps support the positions in Udachna. the Russian offensive on Udashna, but in terms of continuously pushing towards Novopalovka, they might have to regroup a little bit. Alrighty, that is the Pokrovsk direction. Now let us go to the South Donetsk direction. This is, and last week this was where the main show is, and this is actually where a lot of the things are happening as well here. The biggest thing is that we talked about how the collapse of the Andriivka pocket last week, and how that started as soon as I started recording last week. And this week, that pocket has collapsed fully. We have basically confirmation that the Russians have completely cleared the village of Ulakli, and they have cleared, this entire pocket here. And not only that, they have also entered the southern part of the village of Constantinople here. So the battle for Constantinople is still ongoing, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Ukrainians lose this village and they retreat back towards Baratar and all that. But yeah, the Russians are pushing towards, are in Constantinople. They're battling for it. I don't know why the Ukrainians are fighting for this. This is still, they're still surrounded on multiple angles. If they want to actually survive a little bit, I would suggest they fall back to Alexandrivka and Baratar here. But yeah, Constantinople is still being contested, but this Ulakli pocket has been completely cleared. So everything to the east of this Vochka River here and Molkaya River has been captured by the Russians. So yeah, that is a big gain for the Russians, and not only that, some sources are saying that in Andriivka, the Russians are now pushing towards the village of Alexandrivka here, and that they have captured, there's this trench network that's in the between Andriivka and Alexandrivka, and some pro-Russian sources says they captured it. So, the longer they stay in Constantinople, the Russians have a better chance of crossing this divide and entering the village of Alexei-Safivka here and start battling for it. And then, as they're tied down in Constantinople, the Russians will try to clear this village here. And then from here, then they'll put Baratar in the same situation Constantinople is, and then they could take it. Along with this, some pro-Russian sources are saying that the Russians are expanding northwards of Andriivka here, and they have captured some of these fields to the north of Andriivka. And basically, the point here is to, flatten the front line a little bit. Clear the fields that are between their push in Serebrenia with Andriivka here. So the Russians are also pushing north a little bit here. So yeah, that is the Ulakli pocket as Andriivka pocket has collapsed. Only Constantinople remains, and they're now pushing towards Alexandrivka to create another pocket in this Baratar area. And as we continue talking about, speaking of offensives, we're now going to continue talking about in the Velika Novoslovka area, which is still part of South Donetsk. And this is where the Russians are also making very solid progress. Every week, there's always some very solid progress. So this week, we talked about how the Russians took Novocherchnetina and Novoselivka this week, or last week. But this week, we have confirmation that we have the Russians raising their flags in these villages. Not only that, we have the Russians now expanding out of Novocherchnetina and are now expanding towards the village of Sukovka and Dnipro-Nachivka. We actually have geolocated footage that the Russians have cleared these fields to the north of Novokamar. And from this, it looks like the Russians are basically moving along Moltolaya River to take this village right here, which would also help them, as the Russians advance towards the village of Suvkina. So, they've taken this village, and now some sources are saying that or the Russians are now pushing towards these two villages. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Russians took these two villages by the end of next week, and the positions of the Russians are something like this. So this is where the Russians are trying to push for the moment, and from here, then they'll be able to outflank Burlaska, which is where the Russians are pushing towards. Speaking of Burlaska, the Russians are making rapid progress towards this village. They've taken these fields to the south of Burlaska this week, so they are making rapid progress. I wouldn't be surprised if the Russians they could turn to the north, to the east here and clear these fields here and link up with their forces in Novocherchnetina. They could move to the west here and try to start battling for the village of Prilinia, and then they could use Novoselivka to move along this road to reach Villianapolia, take these two villages. And I also wouldn't be surprised if, once they do that, that they start trying to encircle Burlaska from multiple angles and then take this village. And so the main goal here, which, we might see by mid-March, late March or so, but maybe by the second week of March or so, that the Russians have something like this going on. This will make a very solid bridgehead for and this will overrun the first line of positions. Some sources are saying that the Ukrainians have a second line of defenses, which is more weaker, but is still a line of defense around the village of Visola and Shentemko. Around this area, you can see with this blue line here. But this is where the Russians will have to focus on after they take everything that I mentioned before. But yeah, so the offensive in the Velika direction is expanding very rapidly, and we shall how do you say it? You follow it very well, because this is very interesting. I thought they would stop here, but they just regrouped and now they're pushing here. Very interesting. They're pushing here, and it's very interesting how they're making a lot of progress here. And then we're also going to talk about the Zaporozhye direction very quickly here. There's been no changes in the Kherson direction, but a lot of sources are saying the Russians have restarted their offensives towards the village of Pitikaki. And some pro-Russian sources are saying that this village has been taken by the Russians. We don't have any geolocated footage of that, except that the Russians have entered this village in the more south eastern part of the village. So, but some pro-Russian sources says this village has been captured. This does make sense. They're trying to push back all the Ukrainian gains from the Zaporozhye offensive, and one of the areas where they made small progress was in Lubovka and Pitikaki, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Russians try to take these villages back, if only to secure their flanks so that they could push the Ukrainians out of southern Kamyanska, where the Ukrainians are pushing. So yeah, that's the end of this video. Hope you guys enjoyed. Besides, those were the war updates on the ground. Besides that, we talked about how there's all these negotiations happening between the United States and Ukraine and Russia, but I talked about how peace for Russia is basically, unless they get everything they want, which they won't, is a strategic defeat for Russia, for at least with the demands that Trump wants. But anyways, that's the end of this video. Hope you guys enjoyed. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel if you want to continue receiving these weekly Russian war updates. Comment your thoughts and share this video around. So aim high and wander on.